Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
David Cook was last seen on the night of November 18th, 2008, in Amsterdam, Missouri, after finishing his shift at the Kansas City Power and Light Plant. At 10:30 p.m., he clocked out as usual, leaving behind no indication that anything was amiss. A hardworking man known for his dedication, Cook had more responsibilities than most. Aside from his job at the power plant, he managed a vast cattle ranch with over 1,000 head of cattle. His days were long, grueling, and structured. He lived by routine, which made what happened next all the more unsettling. The following morning, at around 7 a.m. on November 19th, Cook reportedly met with one of his ranch hands. According to the employee, they spent some time checking on cattle a few miles from Cook's home before Cook rode off alone on his four-wheeler. That was the last time anyone would ever see him. He failed to show up for a scheduled business meeting later that day, an immediate red flag for those who knew him. Cook was known for his reliability. He did not miss appointments, he did not fall off the grid, and he was not the kind of man to simply vanish. Yet, as the hours passed, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. Investigators initially turned their focus to the ranch hand, the last known person to see Cook alive. However, authorities quickly noted that his statements were inconsistent, and he was not considered a wholly reliable witness. Still, no concrete evidence tied him, or anyone else, to Cook's disappearance. A search of Cook's home yielded more questions than answers. Both of his vehicles were parked at the residence, untouched. His wallet remained inside the house, undisturbed. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no overt indications that anything violent had occurred. Yet Cook was nowhere to be found. The most alarming discovery was the absence of his cell phone, eyeglasses, and money clip. More concerning was the fact that his phone had not been used since the morning of November 19th. Those closest to him knew this was entirely out of character. Cook always answered his phone, no matter what he was doing. The silence from his end was deafening. Cook was a well-respected man in his community. He was known as an avid outdoorsman, a fair and hardworking rancher, and a trusted friend. He had grown up in Ballard, Missouri, the eldest of 7 siblings, and had built a life that revolved around family and responsibility. Though he was divorced, he maintained an amicable relationship with his ex-wife and was deeply connected to his only daughter. He had no known vices, he wasn't involved in drugs, alcohol, or gambling. His disappearance made no sense. Investigators worked tirelessly to uncover leads, but the case remained frustratingly stagnant. Given his background, Cook's disappearance did not seem like the result of a personal crisis or an intentional decision to walk away from his life. It was clear that something had happened to him, and whatever it was, it had not been of his own choosing. Foul play was suspected, but no clear suspect emerged. Cook was a man who had no known enemies, yet someone, or something, had erased him without a trace. Had he been ambushed while riding his four-wheeler that morning? Was there a dispute over business dealings that no one had known about? Or had he simply stumbled upon something, or someone, that sealed his fate? As time passed, hope dwindled. His family, friends, and community continued searching for answers, but none ever came. To this day, David Cook remains missing, his sudden disappearance leaving behind a void that has never been filled. His case remains open, an unsolved mystery haunting the farmland and small-town roads of Missouri. What happened on that quiet November morning in 2008? And why has no one come forward with the truth? Someone knows what happened to David Cook. Until that person speaks, his family will continue to wait, searching for the answers that have eluded them for so many years. Loy Gillespie Evans was a 29-year-old woman living what seemed to be a stable and fulfilling life. She had been married to her high school sweetheart for 5 years, and though they had no children, they had built a comfortable life together. Loy worked as a secretary at the law firm of Miller, Simmons, Moore, and Young, located at 800 West 47th Street of the Country Club Plaza in Kansas City. She had only been working at the firm for about 2 months when she vanished on February 28, 1977. The day of her disappearance seemed entirely routine. Because of a work project, she had taken a later lunch than usual, stepping out of the office at 2:10 p.m. She walked to the parking garage located north of her office building, got into her distinct bright yellow MGB GT sports car, and drove a few blocks before parking at 47th and Marnell. She first stopped at Hellsberg Jewelry, where she had her watch adjusted. Then, she walked back toward the area where she had parked and browsed inside Rothschild's department store. After that, she went to Macy's, where she went to the lower level and asked an employee about a plant. Once finished, she returned to her car and drove to Skaggs Drugstore, about a mile away at the corner of Westport Road and Main Street. There, she bought a cup of coffee and an umbrella, as the forecast predicted rain that week. By police estimates, Loy returned to the parking garage around 3 p.m. and parked in her usual spot, number 98 on the 4th level. After that, she was never seen again. By 4:30 p.m., her coworkers started to grow concerned when she did not return to the office. At 5 p.m., one of the law partners called her home. According to her husband, Don, he had just arrived home from work when the phone rang. Don worked as an insurance auditor employed at a company on Main Street, just less than 4 miles away from Skaggs Drugstore. When he learned that Loy had not returned to work, he immediately called her friends, but none of them had seen or heard from her. At 6 p.m., he reported her missing to the police, but they told him he had to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report. Desperate, Don learned that a friend of Loy's had gone to see a movie at the plaza, so he rushed down there, hoping that she had been with Loy, but she hadn't. Don then stayed at the plaza, searching for her until midnight, calling her name, looking through shops, and checking parking lots. But there was no sign of his wife. The next day, the police searched the parking garage. Loy's car was there, parked as expected in spot number 98, but there were no signs of a struggle. Her car was unlocked, and inside, investigators found her recently purchased umbrella, still with the price tag attached, a donut bag, a rag, and a single flower. The car was meticulously clean. There were no fingerprints inside or outside, not even Loy's. As the investigation began, witnesses came forward with strange details. 2 different people reported seeing vehicles speeding out of the parking garage around the time Loy would have returned. One of the drivers was identified and questioned, but police never located the driver of a brown van. This van had sped out of the garage so fast that it nearly collided with another car. The driver was described as holding up a hand to shield his face. Adding to the mystery, another secretary at Loy's firm had also taken a late lunch that day. She left the office at 2:30 p.m., and when she arrived at the garage, Loy's yellow sports car was already gone. However, when she returned from lunch, the car was back, but Loy was nowhere to be found. No one had seen who brought the car back or what had happened to Loy in the meantime. For 10 days, there were no developments. Then on March 10th, at around 6:30 p.m., a group of children looking for their missing dog found a purse under a bridge at Reinhardt Road and 82nd Street in Kansas City. Curious, they emptied the purse on the ground and took it home to play with. When their father noticed credit cards inside, he immediately called the police. The purse was Loy's. It was damp on one side, but otherwise undamaged, leading investigators to believe it had been resting on the embankment under the bridge for some time. In the surrounding area, police found additional items belonging to Loy, including her checkbook, sunglasses, eyeglasses, prescription medication, her Kansas driver's license, and an open package of thin cigars, something she was known to smoke. With this discovery, police concluded that Loy had not left voluntarily. She had been abducted. They searched the area extensively for days, but found nothing else. 10 days after the purse was discovered, a bizarre turn of events took place. On March 20th, Police brought in a 34-year-old man from Grandview, Missouri, named Richard Lee Smith. He had allegedly been making anonymous phone calls to police departments and businesses in Lee's Summit, claiming that he had killed Loy and buried her under new construction on I-470 and View High Drive, just 5 miles south of where her purse had been found. When questioned, Smith denied making the calls and denied any involvement in Loy's disappearance. Police searched his home but found nothing linking him to the case. Though they conducted an extensive search of the I-470 area using methane detectors and infrared cameras, nothing was found. A month later, they returned with even better equipment but still found nothing. Without evidence, Smith was released and no charges were filed against him. Years passed and Don tried to move forward. 3 weeks after Loy's disappearance, he underwent a grueling 3-hour polygraph test. 9 months later, he attempted to settle her estate, but his request was denied. 7 years later, he had Loy legally declared dead, then sued the insurance company for benefits related to accidental or violent death, plus interest backdated to the day she vanished. The policy was set to double if she had died by violence or accident. These actions raised suspicions. As an insurance auditor, Don would have been well-versed in how policies worked. Some questioned whether he had ulterior motives. Others pointed to his behavior, mentioning dating in interviews, talking about feeling guilty for moving on, things that, while not inherently suspicious, seemed odd given the circumstances. But police fully investigated Don and found no evidence that he was involved. They even traced his and Loy's lives all the way back to their childhoods in Coffeyville, Kansas, uncovering no affairs, no financial issues, and no signs of trouble in their marriage. Investigators cleared him as a suspect. Decades later, the case remains unsolved. Some believe Loy was abducted by a stranger, possibly the driver of the mysterious brown van. Others suspect she knew her abductor, someone who waited for her in the garage and forced her into another vehicle. The discovery of her purse miles away suggests that whoever took her wanted to get rid of evidence. But why take her and not demand a ransom or leave behind a body? Adding to the mystery, in 1978, just a year after Loy disappeared, 20-year-old Rosie Schlicker went missing less than 4 miles from where Loy was last seen. There is almost no information on Rosie's case, but the proximity raises questions. Even more chilling, between 1979 and 1983, 4 unidentified female bodies were discovered in the Kansas City area, each in wooded or remote locations. One of them was even compared to Loy, but none were confirmed to be her. To this day, Loy's fate remains a mystery. Was she targeted by a serial predator? Taken by someone she trusted? The answers have been lost to time, but her case still lingers, unresolved, waiting for the truth to finally surface. Dennis Duhart left his home in St. Louis, Missouri, in the early hours of November 13, 1996, just as he did every other morning. At 4:40 a.m., he set out for his job at Target, where he was known to be a reliable employee, never one to miss a shift without reason. But on that day, he never arrived. Less than 3 hours later, at 7 a.m., his black 1996 Pontiac Grand AM was found locked and abandoned on the westbound span of the Jefferson Barracks Bridge. The location immediately raised alarms. The bridge, which stretches over the Mississippi River, has long been associated with disappearances and suicides. But Dennis's family and friends struggled to accept that he would willingly end his life. Nothing about his past suggested he was someone who would simply walk away. Dennis had always been dependable, the kind of person who followed through on his commitments. He had played soccer and baseball at Oakville High School, where he was known as a good student. After graduating in 1993, he attended St. Louis Community College for 2 years before transferring to Southeast Missouri State University in the fall of 1996 to pursue a business degree. But something had changed. Just 6 days into his new semester, he dropped out. His parents were surprised by the decision, but they assumed he simply wasn't enjoying the experience. Then he made another unusual request. He asked his parents if he could break the lease on his car, a vehicle he had only recently acquired. They encouraged him to keep it, unaware of anything troubling him deeply enough to make him want to abandon his responsibilities. Then there was the matter of what happened in the days leading up to his disappearance. Uncharacteristically, Dennis had made his bed the day before he went missing, something he rarely did. He had also called in sick to work, but he never told his parents about it. When they searched his room after he was gone, they found his credit cards, $70 in cash, and a note that simply read, "Mom and Dad, I'm so sorry it had to come to this." It was a cryptic and painful message, one that left his family searching for meaning. Was this a planned disappearance? Or had something far more sinister happened? Another mystery soon emerged. Dennis had apparently mentioned a girlfriend to his co-workers at Target, a young woman who was supposedly attending the University of Missouri. But his parents had never heard of her, nor could they confirm if she even existed. Who was this girl? Was she a real person, or had he fabricated the relationship? And if she was real, what role, if any, did she play in his vanishing? Then came the phone calls. Shortly after Christmas in 1996, weeks after Dennis had disappeared, his parents began receiving strange calls from a blocked number. Every time they answered, the person on the other end would hang up without saying a word. The calls continued for months, stretching into the summer of 1997. Then, as abruptly as they had started, they stopped. Dennis's parents remained convinced the calls were from their son. It was as if he was trying to reach out, but couldn't bring himself to speak. If Dennis was still alive, where had he gone? And if he had died that morning in November, why was someone calling his family for months afterward? Authorities conducted extensive searches of the river, assuming he may have jumped from the bridge. But no body was ever found, no clothing, no wallet, no trace of him at all. If he had staged his disappearance, had he been successful in starting a new life somewhere? If he had intended to take his own life, why wasn't his body ever recovered? And if foul play was involved, who was responsible? To this day, his disappearance remains a haunting mystery. Rebecca Doisy was last seen on August 5, 1976, in Columbia, Missouri, after she left her apartment in the 400 block of Price Avenue. She had stepped out with Johnny Wright, a man who had persistently pursued her until she finally agreed to go out with him. Doisy, a part-time server at Ernie's Steakhouse, had come to know Wright as a regular at the restaurant. He had asked her out repeatedly, and despite her initial reluctance, she eventually relented. That decision would be the last one anyone would ever know her to make. The two spent the day drinking at the Heidelberg, a local tavern. When she left, her apartment was unlocked, her cat was left behind, and nothing indicated that she had planned to be gone for long. But Rebecca Doisy never returned. She vanished that night, and from that moment on, her family and friends were left with nothing but unanswered questions. Wright, the last person seen with her, disappeared almost immediately after. Within days, he surfaced in St. Louis, but by then, the damage was done. The investigation into Rebecca's disappearance quickly took a dark turn when authorities began looking into Wright's past. His record was extensive: arrests for rape, burglary, assault, and drug possession. Investigators believed he had been responsible for at least 4 rapes in the Columbia area, making him a dangerous and violent man. When police finally got the chance to question him, Wright agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed. For years, Rebecca's case remained unsolved. No body, no crime scene, no direct evidence. But then, in 1985, nearly a decade after she vanished, a breakthrough came. A warrant was issued for Wright's arrest on second-degree murder charges, based on the chilling testimony of his former roommate, Harry Moore. According to Moore, Wright had shown him Doisy's body, covered by a blanket and stuffed in the back of Wright's blue 1972 Toyota. Wright had allegedly told him, with no remorse, that he had offed her. Despite the damning statement, Wright was nowhere to be found. He had vanished just as suddenly as Rebecca had, slipping into the shadows and evading justice for over 30 years. He changed his identity, moving from state to state, Washington, Texas, Georgia, building a new life under the name Errol Rodney Edwards. He got married, raised a family, and for decades, it seemed like he had escaped the consequences of his actions. Then, in September 2009, fate caught up with him in the most ironic of ways. Wright, now living in Lawrenceville, Georgia, walked into a police station and requested a background check on himself. He was hoping to apply for a job. Instead, authorities quickly realized who he really was: a fugitive wanted for murder. His decades on the run were over. In January 2010, Wright stood trial for Doisey's murder. His defense team argued that the case against him was circumstantial, that no physical evidence tied him to the crime, and that Rebecca's body had never been found. But the jury saw through the facade. The weight of Moore's testimony, the failed polygraph, and Wright's suspicious behavior following Doisey's disappearance were enough. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to the maximum of 30 years in prison. Even then, there was no closure for Rebecca's family. Wright never admitted to killing her, never revealed what had really happened that night, and never disclosed where her body might be. He took those secrets to his grave when he died of natural causes in January 2015, still incarcerated. Rebecca Doisey had once been full of promise. A graduate of Kirkwood High School, she had spent 3 years at the University of Missouri, studying education before deciding to leave college and work instead. She was described as independent, sensitive, and deeply creative, a dedicated writer with an active social life and a diverse group of friends. She was a young woman who had her whole life ahead of her until it was cut short by a man who had no regard for anyone but himself. To this day, her body has never been found. The questions of where she was left, what truly happened to her, and whether more people knew about her fate remain unanswered. But one thing is certain: foul play was involved. She didn't simply walk away from her life. She was taken, silenced, and discarded. Janice Dietz was last seen on the night of September 10, 1991, leaving an address in the 2700 block of McNair in St. Louis, Missouri. It was late, around 11 p.m., but nothing seemed particularly unusual about her departure. However, just 3 days later, on September 13th, an ominous discovery was made. Her vehicle was found abandoned in the parking lot of the National Supermarket in the 4600 block of Chippewa Street, only a few blocks away from her apartment on Ellenwood Avenue near Grawa Avenue. Inside the car, her purse remained untouched, containing her personal papers, yet there was no sign of Janice. She had simply disappeared. The unsettling nature of her vanishing only deepened in the weeks that followed. Then, out of nowhere, a phone call shattered the silence. Janice's boyfriend answered the line, and on the other end was Janice herself. But something was wrong. Her voice sounded strange, detached, drugged, or faded out, as he would later describe it. She insisted she was okay, but when he pressed her for details, she gave him a cryptic response. You know. The call abruptly ended before she could say anything more. That was the last time anyone heard from Janice Dietz. In the months before her disappearance, Janice had been making strides in her life. She had previously worked at her boyfriend's dog grooming salon, but had recently transitioned into a new job helping disabled children. She had also enrolled in classes at St. Louis Community College, a decision that suggested she was working toward a brighter future. But despite signing up, she never attended a single class. Her bank account held $1,800, money she never withdrew or used. Her boyfriend described her as a health-conscious woman. She didn't smoke, drink, or use drugs. Nothing about her lifestyle suggested that she would simply walk away from her life, especially without a trace. The discovery of her abandoned car suggested something had gone terribly wrong. If she had left voluntarily, why had she left behind her purse? Why had she never accessed her bank account? And what did that eerie phone call mean? As investigators worked to unravel the mystery, a disturbing possibility emerged, one that sent a chill through the city of St. Louis. Authorities began to suspect that Janice Dietz may have been the victim of a serial killer. At the time, several unsolved disappearances and murders of women in the area led law enforcement to consider whether a predator was operating in the region, targeting unsuspecting victims. Was Janice one of them? But without a body, without concrete evidence, the case soon stalled. No suspects were named, no arrests were made, and her trail went cold. The silence surrounding her disappearance became deafening, leaving her family and loved ones trapped in a cycle of unanswered questions. If she had been taken by force, then by whom? If she had left willingly, then why had she never returned? And what happened to her after that last cryptic phone call? More than 3 decades have passed since that night in 1991, and the fate of Janice Dietz remains unknown. Her case lingers in the shadows of Missouri's most perplexing mysteries, a story with no ending, only speculation. Authorities still suspect foul play, and the possibility of a serial killer cannot be ruled out. But until her remains are found, or someone comes forward with the truth, the question of what happened to Janice Dietz will remain unanswered, a haunting mystery that refuses to fade. Carol Cooper was last seen on September 17, 2004, leaving her residence at Armour Homes, an assisted living center in the 8100 block of Vernal in Kansas City, Missouri. She left on foot and never returned, vanishing without a trace. Carol, an active and independent woman despite her advancing age, was known to travel around the city using public transportation. She enjoyed visiting Independence Square and the Country Club Plaza, attending cultural events, swimming, and walking extensively. But after that September day, she was never seen again. She did not access her bank accounts, use her credit cards, or renew her passport, indicators that she had not planned to disappear voluntarily. To understand the depth of Carol Cooper's story, one must look back nearly 5 years before her disappearance, to a night that changed her life forever. On December 24, 1999, Carol was in her home on Jarboe Street in Kansas City when a stranger broke in. He beat her, raped her, and stole $225 before disappearing into the night. The brutality of the attack left her physically and emotionally scarred. The assailant was described as a black male in his mid-30s, about 5 feet 10 inches and 160 pounds. Investigators were able to obtain a DNA sample from the crime scene, and when they ran it through law enforcement databases, they made a chilling discovery. Her attacker had also been linked to 2 other sexual assaults against elderly women in the Kansas City area, with one as recent as 2005. Even though Carol survived, the attack shattered her sense of security. Afterward, she suffered from debilitating headaches and fell into a deep depression. She struggled to cope with the trauma, and while she tried to maintain her active lifestyle, those who knew her could see the toll it had taken. Whether the attack had anything to do with her later disappearance remains uncertain, but it had undoubtedly changed her. For years, her case remained open with no known suspect, but in August 2007, law enforcement finally made an arrest. DNA evidence led to the identification of Terry U. Birmingham as the perpetrator of Carol's attack. He was arrested and later convicted in January 2010 of forcible rape, robbery, and burglary. His conviction brought a measure of justice, but it was too late to provide answers about Carol's disappearance. By that time, she had already been missing for nearly 6 years. While investigators do not believe Birmingham had any direct involvement in Carol's vanishing, her family and those who knew her cannot ignore the lasting effects of what she endured. The psychological trauma, combined with the physical ailments that followed, may have played a role in her disappearance. Did she simply wander off, confused or disoriented, only to succumb to the elements or an unknown fate? Or did something more sinister happen to her? Despite an extensive search, no evidence has ever surfaced to suggest foul play, nor has Carol ever been found. Law enforcement believes she is likely deceased, though without a body, no definitive conclusion can be reached. Hers is a story of survival, resilience, and mystery, one that remains unanswered. For Carol Cooper, justice came in one form, but closure never did. Those who love her are left with the painful uncertainty of not knowing what became of her after that September day in 2004. Did she lose her way? Was she harmed? Or did the weight of what happened to her years earlier finally push her to disappear? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: Carol Cooper deserved better. And somewhere out there, the answers to her fate remain waiting to be uncovered. Ronald Douglas was last seen in March 1983, while traveling through the Midwest with the Whitey Gleason Trio, an evangelistic musical group. Music had always been a significant part of his life, and with the trio, he had found a way to combine his passion with his faith. But during a stop in Springfield, Missouri, his journey took an unexpected and mysterious turn, one that would leave his loved ones searching for answers for decades. According to Whitey Gleason, the leader of the musical group, Douglas had been staying with him and his family at a local motel. On the day of his disappearance, Gleason and his wife left briefly to run an errand at a nearby store. When they returned, Douglas was gone. Everything he owned, his clothes, his personal belongings, had vanished along with him. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that anything had gone wrong. Just absence. In the days that followed, Gleason provided a note to authorities, allegedly written by Douglas, stating that he had decided to travel on his own and that he would be in touch soon. The letter expressed gratitude toward Gleason, thanking him for his kindness and support. But Douglas never followed up. No more letters arrived. No phone calls were made. From that moment forward, he was never seen or heard from again. Concerned for her son's well-being, Douglas's mother launched an exhaustive search, hiring a private investigator and working closely with law enforcement in Missouri, Texas, and Kansas, states with which her son had personal ties. She held on to the last letter he had sent her, postmarked February 17, 1983, just a few weeks before he disappeared. In it, he wrote to her as he always had, with no indication that he was planning to leave his life behind. She described him as independent, someone who could take care of himself, but never as a person who would simply vanish without explanation. Over the years, tips and potential sightings surfaced, but none led anywhere. One report suggested that Douglas had remained in Springfield after his disappearance, but it was ultimately proven false. The uncertainty surrounding his case made it even more agonizing for his family. Had he left willingly, as the note implied, or had something far more sinister happened to him? There were reasons to question the authenticity of the note. It seemed too convenient, appearing at just the right time to suggest that Douglas had left of his own free will. And yet, why would a man with no history of disappearing, no financial troubles, and no conflicts with his loved ones suddenly choose to sever all ties? If he had walked away, where did he go? Why had he never used his bank accounts, contacted friends, or reached out to his mother, the person he had always stayed in touch with? The lack of evidence, coupled with the absence of a body, left every possibility open. Could he have met with foul play? Was there something about his travels with the Whitey Gleason Trio that he wanted to escape? Or did he leave for reasons no one had ever suspected, vanishing into a new life with no intention of looking back? Though Douglas's case is often linked to Texas due to his past ties, and to Kansas because of his mother's residence, Missouri remains the last known place where he was seen. The disappearance of Frida Denman, her two children, Michael and Sherry Johnson, and her husband, Henry Lee Harbison, remains one of the most perplexing and disturbing cases in Missouri's history. The family vanished in October 1974 from their home in Independence, Missouri, but shockingly, their disappearance wasn't reported for another 5 months. It wasn't a concerned relative or friend who noticed their absence. It was their landlord. By the time authorities were finally alerted in March 1975, any immediate traces of the family had long since faded. When police arrived at the family's home, what they found raised more questions than answers. Frida Denman's clothes were still hanging in the closet, as if she had simply stepped out and would be back at any moment. But her husband's belongings, as well as the children's clothes, were missing. The most alarming discovery was a blood stain on a cushion inside the house, but with the forensic limitations of the time, testing was inconclusive. No bodies were found, no official crime scene was established, and the mystery only deepened. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Henry Lee Harbison, who also went by the name Henry Johnson, may have murdered his family. Harbison had a long criminal history and operated under several aliases. He was known to be involved in questionable activities, and there were whispers that he had ties to a dangerous fringe religious group called the Church of the New Song. Those connected to the group later claimed that the entire family had been murdered, a chilling statement that was never verified but has haunted the case ever since. While police were drawn to the theory that Harbison had killed his wife and children, another possibility emerged, one that was just as sinister. Frida's family feared that while she had been murdered, the children may have been spared and instead given away or trafficked. If that theory is true, then Michael and Sherry may still be out there somewhere, unaware of their true origins. Despite the disturbing nature of the case, it quickly fell through the cracks of law enforcement. Both the Independence Police Department and the FBI were involved in the investigation, but due to miscommunication or bureaucracy, the case was essentially abandoned. The Independence Police believed the FBI would follow up, while the FBI, for reasons unknown, never did. As a result, the files were closed, and for nearly 30 years, no further efforts were made to locate the missing family. Then, in 2004, the case was unexpectedly reopened. Advances in forensic science, renewed interest from investigators, and pressure from the families of the missing brought the case back into the spotlight. But with so much time lost, crucial evidence was long gone, and any potential witnesses had either passed away or disappeared themselves. The reopening of the case brought some hope, but ultimately, no new leads emerged that could definitively explain what happened to Frida, Michael, and Sherry. Because of the bizarre and uncertain circumstances, the disappearances of Michael and Sherry Johnson have been classified as non-family abductions, even though Harbison remains the primary suspect. Did he murder them all and dispose of their bodies in a way that ensured they would never be found? Or did he spare the children and place them in the hands of someone else, possibly within the ranks of the Church of the New Song or another criminal enterprise? To this day, no trace of Frida Denman, Michael Johnson, or Sherry Johnson has ever been found. The case remains unsolved, a chilling mystery that still leaves those who remember them searching for answers. If Michael and Sherry are alive, they would be adults today, possibly living under different names, never knowing that their real lives were stolen from them. And if Frida was murdered, then justice was never served. Somewhere out there, someone knows the truth about what happened in that small Missouri home in 1974. Shamika Cozy was just 16 years old when she vanished in the early hours of December 29, 2008, from her aunt's home in Berkeley, Missouri. It had been an ordinary night, spent in the company of family, with no obvious signs that something was amiss. Throughout the evening, Shamika had stepped in and out of the house multiple times, though no one could say for certain what she was doing outside or whom she may have been meeting. When her family woke up that morning, she was gone. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The front door was left unlocked, and her overnight bag, clothes, and most of her belongings remained inside the house. The only things missing were her purse and jacket. Shamika didn't own a cell phone at the time, which made it even more difficult for her family to track her movements. At first, authorities believed she had left on her own accord. Her mother, while agreeing that Shamika may have voluntarily walked out that night, was adamant that she wouldn't have stayed gone for this long without reaching out. Prior to her disappearance, Shamika's mother had growing concerns about her daughter's activities. She had caught her with a fake ID, one that she had been using to gain entry into local nightclubs. She had also suspected Shamika had been experimenting with marijuana. One day, she saw her daughter getting into a dark-colored vehicle with a much older man, a man that police still have not identified but believe could hold key information about what happened to Shamika. Years after her disappearance, Shamika's mother discovered a notebook filled with handwritten messages that she had exchanged with a school friend. One entry, written just months before she went missing, mentioned a boyfriend and suggested that she might be pregnant. Police interviewed the boyfriend, but he offered no useful information, and Shamika's friends were equally unhelpful. Over the years, there have been theories, rumors, and speculation about what happened to Shamika. Some believe she ran away and is still in the local area, possibly in East St. Louis, Illinois, a place she was known to frequent. Others, including her mother, fear she may have fallen victim to sex trafficking. But with little concrete evidence, her fate remains unknown. Various sources have listed conflicting dates for her disappearance, citing December 28th or December 30th, but the last confirmed sighting places her at her aunt's house on December 29th, 2008. Though more than a decade has passed, Shamika's family has never stopped searching. She was just a teenager with her whole life ahead of her, and somewhere, someone knows what happened to her that night. On the evening of November 23rd, 1983, Linda Kreitz called her oldest son from home. She was in good spirits and made plans to visit him the next morning at 9 a.m. for Thanksgiving. But when Thanksgiving Day arrived, Linda never showed up. She was never seen or heard from again. At the time of her disappearance, Linda was in the middle of a divorce from her husband, Lou Kreitz. The two had been living in the same house despite the ongoing separation, an arrangement that often led to tension. Lou was the last known person to see her alive. He claimed they had argued the night before Thanksgiving, after which Linda went in her bedroom and shut the door. According to him, when he left the next morning to celebrate the holiday with his parents, the bedroom door was still closed. He said he assumed she was sleeping and left without disturbing her. It wasn't until a full week later that she was reported missing. At first, Lou cooperated with investigators, answering their questions and assisting with the search. But when it became clear that police considered him a suspect, he stopped talking and retained an attorney. Despite their suspicions, authorities could never find enough evidence to link him to Linda's disappearance. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Linda had been seeing another man. Police investigated this lead as well, but nothing definitive ever came from it. If Linda had left of her own volition, she left behind no clues, no notes, no sign of planning. And if she had met with foul play, her body was never found. Decades later, her case remains open but cold. Investigators now consider her disappearance a likely homicide, but with no crime scene, no physical evidence, and no body, proving what happened has been impossible. Linda Kreitz was a mother, a woman looking forward to a new chapter in her life, a future that was taken from her in ways still unknown.